Members, I'm going to call the meeting back into order here. Representative Garofalo moves that House File 843 be referred to the General Register. And Representative Garofalo, I know we got a few amendments. Some are technical, some aren't so technical. Do you want to take any of those, or do you want to go through and explain the bill first?
Mr. Chairman, the documents you have are reflected in the A69 amendment. So at this time, I'll move the A69 amendment. And there are, staff is advising me of some oral corrections that they are aware of that I should make as well to the A69 amendment that I'll incorporate in that. The first is on page 7, line 34, we delete the period. Then on page 8, line 1, we are deleting the 26 and inserting the number 25. And third and finally, a new provision is being added to the A69 amendment that on page 72, we will delete section 10 of the bill. And this conforms to the spreadsheets we have and is what the author's intent is before this committee. So, Mr. Chairman, I
Page
would...
72, delete which section? 10, did you say?
Section 10 on page 72, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. All right. We'll incorporate those changes into the A69 amendment. Representative Garofalo, do you have any other, why don't you go through the A69 amendment? Do you have anything else you want to add on that?
Mr. Chairman, it's primarily technical changes, but I will highlight some maybe larger items people may be interested in. First of all, the Office of Broadband Development is restored. This was something that we thought they could get their grants out that they had already administered by June 30th. Subsequent communication from them indicates they could not do that, so we're going to restore that office. In addition, there used to be a $1 million transfer from the Petro Fund into this bill. The chair was misinformed on the consequences of that action, so we have canceled that transfer and we put it back in there. Again, there's some changes for the Alina Courage Kinney fix to allow them to continue to do what they're doing. There are some different technical definitions regarding the definition of a car and inserting motor vehicle. The redesign of the Renewable Development Fund to the Energy Fund, who's responsible for those obligations when it transfers in, make some changes to those. For another provision, they're changed now, getting rid of the words with the commission for and inserting for commission. Primarily technical stuff. If there was one item that would maybe strike people's interest, not that people want to talk about it, but it's going to be on, yeah, so anyways, that's what the, those are mostly the sections in there, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, discussion to the A69 amendment. Representative Carlson.
Yeah. A quick question. That part that was incorporated into the amendment, I didn't quite pick up on what that was and whether that was substantive or not.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Representative Garofalo.
Representative Carlson, there's been an agreement reached between the Department of Labor and Industry on the builders with regards to construction codes. This conforms to that agreement by deleting the language that's in the bill. Do you want to add on to it, Ms. Newman?
Mr. Chair and members, this is the energy performance code changes, and as Representative Garofalo said, there was an agreement, or there is an agreement. The bill had already stricken the appropriation that was made for rulemaking, and inadvertently the language was not stricken as well. So,
Yeah, I just
Representative Carlson.
wanted to double check. I've got you on TV, you know.
Oh, all right.
What that means is that with my hearing aids, that I can hear you better.
Oh, good.
Or I can hear him better, one or the other.
Good.
But he left his at home, he told us earlier.
All right.
No, seriously, that picks up the sounds and screens everything else out.
Oh, all right.
Technology is important. But thank you for revisiting that for me.
Sure, absolutely. Representative Mahoney.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a variety of questions on the amendment, just asking for explanations of it. So, Representative Garofalo, on page 1 of the amendment, line 22, you're deleting 216C.417. That's Made in Minnesota Solar. Could you what's that doing? We stopping Made in Minnesota Solar, and how does that affect any payments or that have been committed or encumbered?
Chair Garofalo.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Mahoney, so you're looking at line 1.22 on the A69 amendment, is that right?
Yes, the 1.22 on, and the A69 amendment.
1.22, I
Right.
believe.
Yeah, 1.22.
So what's happening, Representative Mahoney, is for those who are already in the, and if I screw up here, please correct me, but the Made in Minnesota program, as we know it, is going to be expiring and going away. However, there are people who are on the existing program who have already signed up. Those commitments are going to be met. What this is right here is this is the new fund, the energy fund that we're creating up, and it has allowable uses for distributed generation, including rooftop solar, solar thermal, the 5 qualifying conditions we discussed before. My understanding is that this was just accidentally included in there, that it's not, Made in Minnesota is gone under this proposal, so it'd make no sense to reference a statute that we actually are deleting.
And
Representative Mahoney.
Mr. Chair and Representative Chair Garofalo, the fact that you're deleting this will not affect anyone who's already in the program.
Chair Garofalo.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Mahoney, that's correct.
Okay, it's only because it goes through your hearing. I couldn't use that.
Representative Mahoney, did you have another question on the amendment?
I've got about 5 or 6, so if you'll
All right, go
continue to
ahead.
come back. On page 2, line 17, you're defining low-income person. Are you just taking out the minority and spreading it out, spreading the money out? I think this is the Urban Initiative Grant, or
Right, which page and line on the amendment?
page 2,
Yep.
line 17.
This brings in the Vogel bill as amended.
Right. This was,
Chair Garofalo.
when we passed the Vogel bill,
Speak into the mic.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Mahoney, this is the Vogel language that we amended in committee. I believe that in the original draft, the amendment was not included in it. So,
And Mr. Chair.
Representative Mahoney.
Mr. Chair and Chair Garofalo, page 7, line 27, you're on page 115 of the bill, you're deleting subdivision 5.
Yep, and what that, Mr. Chairman.
Chair Garofalo.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Mahoney, what that does is it deletes the open and statutory appropriation for storage, geothermal, wind, solar thermal rebates, and makes it a direct appropriation on page 30.
Okay, Mr. Chair.
Representative Mahoney.
And then I suspect that ties in on page 7, on the same page, on line 33, and page 121, line 22 of the bill, you're deleting everything after the B and inserting the utility shall not make incentive payments under this section. Could you explain that piece?
Chair Garofalo.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Mahoney, the intent of the author is that these incentive payments are now going through the Department of Commerce, as they are going right now. Maybe,
Ma'am, can you introduce yourself and give us your testimony?
Chair and members of the committee. My name is Harriet Hendricks from House Fiscal Analysis. So what this language does on the amendment, line 7.33, it clarifies what obligations are still outstanding under the Renewable Development Fund that Excel is paying, and it conforms it to the idea that any outstanding obligations will be paid by Excel, and before revenue would come in to the new energy fund account. This language allows the utility to not make any more payments under this section, and inadvertently, we deleted lines 23 to 26 on page 121 of the bill, and that should be actually lines 23 to 25.
we change that.
So we should, yeah, make an oral amendment.
No, we did that already.
We did that already. Okay, so we changed that to 25. So then it would actually, the full language would say that the utility shall not make any incentive payments under this section for applications received after the effective date of this bill, of the act.
It's always good,
Representative Mahoney,
always good to have staff answer your questions before you get to them, because that was my next question. And then, actually, my last question on the amendment is on page 8, line 26. You're deleting the new language and inserting upon petition by public utility if the commission determines. Could you explain that particular paragraph?
Chair Garofalo.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Mahoney, as you may know, as part of the E21 working group, a broad array of stakeholders have been meeting with regards to the design of a new multi-year rate plan, sort of a 21st century model of regulation. This has involved environmental groups, efficiency groups, the utilities, and this is a language that's related to those conversations. So what happens is that if you have a federal, state, or regulatory action, you're basically allowed to capture the the costs for that recovery instead of having to instead of making the utility eat it.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Other questions or comments on the A69 amendment? All right, members, seeing no further discussion, Representative Garofalo renews his motion to adopt the A69 amendment. All in favor? I think those numbers were incorporated. The A69 amendment with the incorporations, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion prevails. The A69 amendment is adopted. Next, members, we've got the A71 amendment. Members, I'll move the A71 amendment. This is, I guess, I'm not sure if I'd call it a technical amendment, but it's a pretty non-controversial amendment on that Mr. Marks brought to my attention. Basically, there are a number of references in the bill where money is appropriated, and basically the language says it's available until used, and this just puts an end date on it, so it just doesn't sit out there forever if it's not used, and it puts the end date out to the end of the next biennium. Any discussion to the A71 amendment? Seeing none, all in favor of the A71 amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion prevails. The A71 amendment is adopted. Next, members, we have the A74 amendment. And members, I don't know, Chair Garofalo, if you want me to move the A74 amendment, I'll move the A74 amendment. Members, what this does is it puts $8 million into the broadband development account, which would bring the bill up to a total of $10 million of broadband authorized. And then it makes a few changes to prioritize how the broadband money is distributed, basically having it prioritized for economic development in underserved areas. Members, is there any discussion to the A74 amendment? Representative Wagenius.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. You said economic development in underserved areas. How is that? Did I hear you correctly on that?
I believe you did, yes.
Okay, so this gives me no context. Tell me how much money we are going to need for these unserved areas in the state. What is, so is the $8 million 10% of the money we need? Is it 1%? Is it 50%? I have no context here.
You know, I guess, Representative Wagenius, I don't know that number offhand. I guess I felt that we should have some additional money going into the broadband area, and I may ask Representative Gunther, who's worked in this area more than I, if he wants to weigh in on this. But in terms of the underserved versus the unserved, I know there was some criticism with the other broadband grants that were done last time that much of the money was spent on unserved areas with a great deal of money spent on a very small number of people. And while this doesn't say that you can't do unserved areas, the intent of it is, the language is such that it would try to get us a better bang for the buck than we got out of the the last broadband grants that we did. Representative Wagenius.
You talked a lot about the broad without answering my question. I mean, I think for us to know what this means is we need to know how much is the need out there. Is this 1%, 10%, 50% of the need? And that is a question that we ought to have the answer to.
Well, I guess I would just say, Representative Wagenius, I believe there's a significant need out there. I don't have a specific percentage for you. The other thing is, I do think that there are technological innovations taking place all the time that may obviate the need in some of these areas over time, and perhaps not all that many years. But at the same time, there are people waiting for broadband now that I think this would help, and so that's why I'm bringing the amendment forward. I don't have I can't give you a specific percentage like you're asking, though, Representative Wagenius. I don't know that number. Representative, I have Representative Mahoney, Gunther, and Carlson. Representative Mahoney.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And to answer Representative Wagenius's question, the governor's broadband task force came up with a dollar figure of $200 million to serve the needs of a border-to-border broadband. Last year's budget, we put $20 million in for 1 year, and I can't remember the exact miles that they got out of that and the matching funds they got from industry. This bill, your amendment, or I don't know if it's Representative Chair Garofalo's or Chair Knobloch's amendment.
It's my amendment.
Well, that makes sense then. I was kind of shocked that Representative Garofalo might have put an amendment like this in. So if you do the numbers, it's probably less than 5% of what the asking price is for a year. But I think you're doing $8 million over the biennium at this point. You still have $300 million on the bottom line, so there's hope for Greater Minnesota. But this is certainly a measly piece. But that's to answer Representative Wagenius's question.
Thank you.
Well, I would say, Representative Mahoney, first, there is $2 million in the bill already, so that would bring us up to $10 million. And secondly, I guess I don't know what the division is between the underserved and the unserved areas. And this bill, by prioritizing the underserved area and looking more towards the economic development aspect, I think, again, gets us a much bigger bang for the buck. And I think we have to perhaps have a policy discussion before we talk about spending $200 million to potentially reach every last home in the state, especially if we do believe that there's some other wireless or other sorts of technologies that are going to be out there that are going to be able to reach them. If that wasn't the case, and I guess I was convinced that that wasn't the case, I might feel differently about it. But again, this is prioritizing the underserved areas, so I think in that sense the number's a little larger than maybe it would appear. But Representative Gunther.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chair, I would like to respond to your comments there, if I could.
Well, sure. All right. I know Representative Gunther, I gathered, had some more information on it too, but sure, go ahead, Representative Mahoney.
Well, Mr. Chair, we did have a very extensive policy decision on broadband, and we had a very extensive list of witnesses in Representative Garofalo's committee about broadband. And I'm happy to see $8 million. And the $2 million that you spoke to is not in broadband. It is an earmark out of the Minnesota Investment Fund, which I find interesting that it's an earmark for broadband for pretty much one city in the metro area. And broadband, these dollars in broadband were to serve Greater Minnesota, not the urban area. So you really have $8 million for greater Minnesota and $2 million for urban Minnesota. So we did have a big, long policy discussion. And I think Representative Garofalo's bill got up to, in his committee, up to $180 million to be laid over, and we come up with $8 million, Mr. Chair. So, and then I'll let you go to Representative Gunther, but I have a couple other questions about the unserved and underserved that you're talking about.
All right, Representative Gunther.
Well, first of all, Mr. Chairman, broadband is truly an economic development engine that will help Greater Minnesota and all unserved and underserved areas. And the thing about it is AT&T, the Minnesota XO executive of AT&T, said they're going to spend $400 million on digital broadband in the next few areas. They're going to announce it right after session. Frontier Phone Company, my phone company, is getting a federal grant for $30 million a year for I don't know how many years to help with unserved and underserved areas in Greater Minnesota that they handle. So there is money coming there, and there is a different technology coming there. And last session, or last time, the only time there was broadband funding happened in the House and Representative Mahoney's committee, and I was glad it did. And I think this year, the governor recommended $30 million, the Senate $100 million, and we recommended 2. And now with your amendment, we got it up to 10. What the magic number is, I don't know, because we sure look stupid if AT&T and some of these other companies came up with a new technical innovation to handle those areas that are unserved and underserved that would not require the communities that are getting it or the companies in areas getting it, they have to pay 50%. If we get company coming in there that will not have to have that happen, I think it would be a great plus for the whole state.
Representative Carlson, and say, you should mention, Representative Mahoney, if the city you mentioned that is being talked about for the $2 million is the same one I'm thinking of, I guess I'd hardly describe it as urban. I mean, it's certainly in Greater Minnesota. But Representative
Not by far. But
Maybe a
Carlson?
REIT.
Yes,
Yeah, it's
Representative Carlson.
Yeah.
Sorry, your name's already scratched out on my list, and I was like, now, who was it again? Representative
No,
Carlson.
Representative Mahoney covered the point I was going to make last spring, working with Representative Mahoney with the supplemental bill. We had a lot of references to the task force report. He covered that, so thank you.
Representative Khan.
Yes. Well, one of the things that I had observed before, and of course I know very little about all these associated technologies, but more than 10 years ago when I was on, I think, a CSG trip to Asia, you saw incredibly extensive, much more extensive than here, use of cell phones. And I wondered how the use of broadband kind of implies laying cables and stuff like that. And I wondered how the more extensive use of cables that we're doing these days the more extensive use of cell phones that we're doing these days has affected this debate and this discussion.
Representative Gunther, would you like to respond to that?
I was also in China, and there's certainly, everybody had one of those in their ear, and I agree with that. We are doing everything wireless and digitally.
Okay.
And I think that technology is here, finally reaching the United States, and I think it will have a big impact, especially on those areas that do not have something that, the areas that do have the appropriate speeds and ability to take care of our needs are. I know there's the largest rural co-op in Minnesota is in a little town of Truman. They were thinking about moving because they didn't have enough bandwidth. It's amazing what competition does. The town of Medelia came up with a deal, and all of a sudden Frontier Phone Company says, hey, we have the answer. We're supplying you now. We'll take care of you. It's amazing to me how the state and the people in the state seem to race to the right solutions, and I think we're doing that in Minnesota, and I don't want to spend $200 million in something that we don't have to. So I'm glad we're going a little slow. Maybe not as slow as fast as we should, but we're a little slower.
Representative Mahoney.
You know, it's a policy debate, and I won't get into that. I do have some questions on the amendment, Mr. Chair. I will say we had witnesses that spoke to the not being favorable of wireless and satellite with relatively poignant examples, but as again, I won't get into that. I guess I have to ask you, on page 2, line 12, you're removing at speeds that meet a Federal Communication Commission's threshold of 4 megabytes per second download and 1 megabyte per second upload, and you replace it with as defined in section 116J.39. Mr. Chair, there are absolutely no definitions in 116J.39. None. There is no definition of an upload speed or a download speed. So what are you asking them to do? And I have the statute book here. I'm sure, somebody might want to read it, but. I've
Maybe I
already
can
read it.
have you bring the statute book up to me so I can see that again, Representative Mahoney. And Mr. Mahoney, while I'm looking at that, I don't know if you have another question you'd like to
Yeah,
ask.
I've got a couple other questions.
All right, go ahead.
I'm wondering what the chair of the author of the bill thinks of this particular amendment.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Mahoney.
Chair Garofalo.
Investment in technology infrastructure is a good thing that expands productivity, expands work, and gives diversity to our economy. The devil is always in the details about how it should be done and the manner that it's done. Those can produce significant return on investment, so they can end up being obsolete technological white elephants. There's a lot of big gap between the potential and the downside to it, Representative Mahoney.
So, Mr.
Representative
Chair,
Mahoney.
so Representative Garofalo, I won't belabor the point, but I know this is not your favorite amendment, and I am I'm impressed by your ability to sit quietly.
It's expanding broadband.
Sir, I see, Chair Garofalo, I see you've got someone next to you at the witness stand there. Is that someone that wanted to testify on a question of Mr. Mahoney's here?
This is Bob Eloff, MD. He's from House Research.
All right. Okay, sorry, I'm new here again. I don't know them all. Sir, welcome to the Committee on Ways and Means.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. I wanted to speak to Representative Mahoney's statement about 116J.39, and I'm forced to disagree with him. But in subdivision 1, there are definitions, particularly paragraph B, the definition of broadband or broadband service. And the part of it that's relevant to the A74 amendment is that broadband is defined as having transmission speeds that at a minimum meet the Federal Communications Commission definition for broadband. And that replaces lines on, as you can see, on lines 212 and 213 of the A74 amendment. Language is struck which says at speeds that meet a Federal Communications Commission threshold of 4 megabits per second download and 1 megabit per second upload. That took the Federal Communications definition at the time this legislation was enacted. By referencing the definition in 116J39, it will enable the speed, the definition of broadband to increase as the FCC does it, which they just did this January. And the new speed, according to the FCC, is 25 megabits per second.
Representative Mahoney.
So, Chair Knobloch, what you have just increased the download and the upload speeds for broadband service in Greater Minnesota by putting this particular amendment on. Is that correct?
That would be correct, Representative Mahoney.
And if those numbers change over the next 2 years or 10 years, those numbers would apply on any new project, Mr. Chair, correct?
I believe that's the case, Representative Mahoney. I think, the intent was that, this is a a fast-changing technological situation, and what was, considered state-of-the-art 10 years ago is obviously different today.
Well, and here's the reason I want to be very, very clear with on the record language. The next underlined piece in your amendment, 218, in need of a broadband service to retain or create jobs or to promote significant economic growth. And you take out the unserved. So what you're doing is you're taking out the definition of who, that limitation of service. And there is no economic growth. I need economic growth on the east side. So if I have enough sway in the bill, or I can hide something in a bill, I can make broadband service political. And you've just made this a political issue. So if a rural member or a urban member was able to say, this will help economic development on 7th Street or on Main Street in Wilmer or wherever, that's what you've done.
Well, Representative Mahoney, I guess what I would say I'm doing with this amendment is trying to see that the money is spent in a way that best prioritizes the creation of jobs. I mean, before, it wasn't necessarily that. It was potentially going to only unserved areas, and certainly there are needs there too, but as we look at using the money, I guess it was my intent to try to use it in a way that would, again, as I said, get us the most bang for the buck. And I guess if you're saying, well, that's a political process, I mean, I'm sure that there were people that said the way the money was distributed before was a political process too, because there were decisions made as to where to give the money before as well. I mean, not everyone obviously got all the money that they wanted. So this is simply a way to try to get us the most bang for the buck and best promote economic growth.
Well, Mr.
Representative
Chair,
Mahoney.
actually, there were people trying to do what you are doing right here, and the fight was to unpoliticalize it and make it serve the unserved and the underserved. You just, with your amendment, you took all that work that all the people got, all the interested parties got together to assure that it would not be political, and you just made it political. So that's what you did, Mr. Chair, and I just wanted you to know that.
Okay. Other discussion to the amendment? Okay, seeing none, all in favor of the A74 amendment, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed?
No.
Motion prevails, the A74 amendment is adopted.
Did you ask for a division?
Representative Garofalo, to your bill as amended.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. I think at this time I'll have House staff just do a very high-level brief overview of the finance target for this committee and the individual areas.
Mahoney's job.
Representative Wagenius, while they're getting ready to do that. Yes.
Just, since we've been adopting amendments, and I just want to make sure I understand the previous amendment, particularly as it relates to there were a lot of language changes on pages 121 to 120, well, I get 123, but 121 to 122, if you could just succinctly say what the net result of all those changes were.
That's a question to Chair Garofalo. I guess Chair Garofalo?
Mr.
Is
Chairman,
that-
Representative Agenius, are you referring to the 74 or 69 amendment?
Your 69 amendment,
All right, and what were the lines you were looking at, Representative Agenius?
and you made, on page 7 and 8 of the amendment, it talks about pages 121, there are 5 amendments there, and on page 122, there are 3 more, and I just would like not a lot of explanation, but just to succinctly tell us what the net result of those changes was?
Okay,
Chair Garofalo.
yeah, I mean, the first thing is Representative Wagenius, on page 8 at the very top, we had an oral amendment to change that line with regards to the Excel Solar Rewards Program. After that, there is net metering changes to make sure that it's avoided cost going forward. Next is that we are clarifying the Department of Commerce obligation for future Made in Minnesota payments, because while the program's going away, for those people who did sign up for it in the last 2 years, we make it clear that the Department of Commerce would be doing that. We delete the statutory appropriation for solar incentives, and we make it a direct appropriation. We fix the timing of the transfer of the solar thermal rebates. We also make a technical modification to the combined heat and power language so that it introduces an efficiency threshold for qualifying projects that are found under federal regulations regarding the Public Utility Regulation Policy Act, and then the cost recovery provision that Representative Mahoney asked me about earlier.
Yeah,
Representative Guinness.
thank you, Mr. Chair. I thought the net metering was changed to avoided costs, and I just wanted to make sure I was correct about that.
All right, Chair Garofalo.
Well, no, the bill already has net metering for avoided costs, so no.
Chair Garofalo, why don't you give us an overview of your bill, and then we can have further discussion about it.
Mr. Chairman, I'm just going to defer to staff to cover the higher fiscal points, and I'm happy to, there's a lot of content in there. I'll be happy to answer members' questions.
Thank you. Ms. Hendricks,
Mr. Chair.
welcome to the committee.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I'll read off the spreadsheet. We don't have the highlighter up there, but that has, at the top says tracking sheet, House File 843, the 2E, the second engrossment. Just wanted to point out that this does not include the newly adopted budget resolution with the increase of 9.57 million. But I'll highlight where we would see changes in the updated spreadsheet. The first page of this spreadsheet includes a summary of all the direct appropriations by agency and by fund, starting off on line 1 with the direct appropriation totals by agency from the general fund. So the first line, line 2, Department of Employment Economic Development. Again, that is a reduction in base of 16.125 million, but that would change with the now adopted amendment that would appropriate $8 million to broadband development grants. So that 16.125 change between that base and the House would change to 8.125. Going down the list, there's the Minnesota Housing Finance Agency with a reduction of about 10.5 million. Labor and industry going up by 876 million compared to base, 2.8 million increase for Explore Minnesota Tourism. Bureau of Mediation Service, a $900,000 reduction. Further down on line 10, Department of Commerce, an 8.245 million increase, and Public Utilities Commission at a 1.452 million reduction. That brings us to a total direct appropriations of for the biennium in this bill without the broadband amendment to $323,776,000. So that reduction is a reduction in base budget of $17,102,000. But with the broadband, it would be a 9.1 million reduction in general fund direct appropriations. No changes made to the statutory appropriations for 2 agencies. Changes in general fund revenue are listed below. One maybe to point out is line 32 for Commerce. There's a cancellation of the transfer that would go from the automobile theft prevention account to the general fund, and now is going to the insurance fraud prevention account. That brings us to total general revenue changes of 1.921 million for the biennium. and a net general fund impact. And again, those are not including the latest updates or the latest amendments of $332,470,000. The original committee target that this committee, the GGEA, or Job Growth and Energy Affordability Policy and Finance Committee, the original target was $330,900,000 for the biennium, but again, that has just been changed to a committee target of $340,470,000. So with the additional broadband funds, the increase in target of 9.57 million covers both kind of the difference on line 45 as well as the additional appropriation. Below that are a direct appropriation total by funds. I won't go through those in detail, but then starting on page 2 and further, committee members will find the details by agency. I probably won't go through all of them, but just to kind of show that first is the riders under different divisions within the departments, and under changed items, members will find the changes that the bill makes, either in reductions in appropriations or otherwise new programs. And then all the way at the end of the spreadsheet, starting on line on page 10, line 596, members will find any changes in non-general fund revenue, as well as changes in non-state fund expenditures and revenue on line 623 on page 11. If members have any questions or about specific items, I'm happy to answer those.
Any questions on the spreadsheet? Otherwise, I'll ask Chair Garofalo to go through the rest. Okay, Representative Mahoney.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Chair Garofalo, did you meet your target?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Mahoney, as modified.
As amended.
by the committee, yes.
Thank you.
Representative Hillstrom.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Garofalo, I see that you spend Representative Cornish's money from the Auto Theft Prevention Program, which has always been in public safety in the past, and now you change it to be somewhere else. So if I could get that, some clarification, you're actually taking money from grants that are given to counties for the prosecution of auto theft and to law enforcement to recover vehicles that are stolen. And what are you doing with it in this bill?
Chair Garofalo.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Hillstrom, under current law, that one half of that is put into the general fund. What this bill does is it cancels that general fund transfer and instead directs it to the Department of Commerce, where it goes into the insurance fraud prevention account.
Mr. Chair.
Representative Hillstrom.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So if I could get some clarification, so you are not doing anything to the current auto theft prevention grants? You are simply taking money that was not currently being used, or was that the money that was allocated for auto theft prevention grants? I want to get a sense of whether you're going to make it harder to catch bad guys who steal cars, or if you're going to actually just take money that should have been going for catching bad guys who are stealing cars.
Chair Garofalo.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Hillstrom, the good thing is that technology is making it more and more difficult to steal cars, so that's a good news for all of us. But how those dollars are appropriated in the general fund, I do not know. Whether that's the funding source for it or not. What I will tell you is that this is money that used to be going into the general fund is now being directed to this account. Whether that's tied to those grants or not, I don't know if the grants for those are funded from the general fund. There's certainly, I'm not aware of any direct linkage.
Mr. Chair.
Okay, yep, Representative Hillstrom.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If Representative Cornish would answer a question.
You bet.
Representative Cornish, are you aware of whether or not the auto theft prevention grants are linked to the money that he's taking, or will you at least investigate whether or not the money that you spend on auto theft prevention is being taken by Representative Garofalo?
Representative Cornish.
I'll investigate the heck out of it.
Thank you.
I'm told that Mr. Marks may have some information on this. Mr. Marks.
Mr. Chair, Representative Hillstrom, this bill redirects money that was being transferred from the auto theft prevention account to the general fund. It redirects that to a different account. It doesn't do anything with the money in the auto theft prevention account that was paying for the grants, or the actual spending out of that account. So it's money that was transferred to the general fund and not tracked anywhere. I mean, it was just general fund revenue. And that's the money it's redirecting, and then it pays for the cost of the general fund losing that revenue. But it's directing what had been general money transferred to the general fund, is directing it to a different account in a different fund.
Okay.
Representative Cornish, I guess you don't have to investigate the heck out of it.
No, that's just what I was going to say, so.
All right. See no further questions. Chair Garofalo, why don't you continue with your presentation on the bill?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think
Okay. Oh, go ahead.
it's Friday, it's sunny out. I've done an overview of the bill. I'm happy to answer members' questions about the bill.
Representative Carlson, then Wagenius.
Being that he's done, I wanted to give him a chance to finish, but, well, I could ask several questions, but what's happening with the Bureau of Mediation Services here?
Chair Garofalo.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, can you point me to a line on the spreadsheet? That way we're all looking at the same document.
I'm looking at the first page,
What line number?
number 6.
Okay, so that's the top line. But
Chair Garofalo.
if you look for the specific changes within that account, that'll be farther down in the spreadsheet, which should be on page 7. And Representative Carlson, I'm assuming you're referring to the change items in lines 407 through 414?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, we are reducing those appropriations to those funds listed.
And
Representative Carlson.
Mr. Chairman, I guess when I looked the spreadsheets over, but I guess when I say what's happening here, I can read the numbers, but what's the impact of those?
Chair Garofalo.
Mr. Chairman, and, I'm sorry, I didn't hear that, what?
Representative Carlson, can you repeat yourself?
Mr. Chairman. Well, I'm asking I didn't have the mic here. I'm asking why the change? What's happening? What's the impact of your numbers?
Chair Garofalo.
Mr. Chairman.
I didn't hear any of, Mr. Chairman, of the testimony, so I want to know what's happening with the Bureau.
Chair Garofalo.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Carlson, the target for this committee budget previous to today's amendment was 23.5% lower than it was in the previous biennium. It's about a $100 million reduction. So as part of that, we have to find service reductions and find areas where we can save money. As you may or may not know, the Office of Collaboration and Dispute Resolution, there's been some good things said about that, but at the end of the day, you have to find the dollars to meet this committee's target. If you have other suggestions on how we could to meet that target, I certainly would be open to those suggestions, but at the end of the day, it's about dollars and cents.
Representative Carlson.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, that, I can explore that further. Maybe I can talk with some other people. I was trying to figure out what the impact of that particular reduction is. We all know very well in this committee what the targets were. And we did provide alternatives, by the way, when we were dealing with the budget resolution. But I don't think that really answers the question I was asking, but I'll wait and ask others then. Mr. Chairman, I did have another one I noticed here was, and it deals with the film board. What is the impact there? There's a $3 million reduction. Is that the appropriation, I guess, I'm asking Representative Garofalo, that we use to attract films from time to time? Is that what that $3 million reduction is?
Chair Garofalo.
Yeah, so this is like the incentives for Brad Pitt sort of stuff. And the film, The committee was pretty strong at a time that when we're looking to meet our target, that would be an elective investment, and we thought our dollars are better steered in other ways within the bill.
Representative Carlson.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not going to belabor that one, other than that's had a history of on again, off again, but when we have provided those funds, it has attracted some filmmakers to the state of Minnesota, and it's my understanding it's been several years since I dealt with the issue directly, well, not several, but probably 4, that we have had a history of attracting some pretty major films as a result of that, and other states are putting much more into that activity than what we are, and that filmmaking not only gives good publicity to Minnesota often, which would obviously not be the only reason, but it also creates employment and expenditures within the state of Minnesota. So some of us at least have always felt that that was a good investment from the standpoint of economic development, but I have a feeling that a certain senator will perk up on that one, so I'm not going to worry about it until you get into conference committee. Thank you.
I have Representative Wagenius, Liebling, and Mahoney.
Could I just respond to his
To that point, all right, sure, Representative Mahoney.
Representative Knobloch, thank you, and Representative Carlson. Actually, I don't think we heard a bill on the film board in committee, so I don't know how strongly it was, but my recollection is we did not hear a bill, and I got a whole list of ones that we didn't, so.
Okay, Representative Wagenius.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Garofalo, it's sort of hard to see you here through Representative Gunther. You want to escape too. When we were in committee and you were talking about your subsidies to electric cars, or people who buy electric cars, I asked the question why we were not doing the same thing for electric buses. And if I recall correctly, your answer to me was, well, that's not workable. And yesterday I read in the Star Tribune about a Minnesota company with, I was going to say shops, but that's not the right word, with big facilities in St. Cloud and Crookston, is coming to the Twin Cities to demonstrate its electric buses. So my question is, have you rethought your position on that? Well, let me start with that. Have you rethought your position on that?
Chair Garofalo.
Mr. Chair and Representative Wagenius, no, I have not. Certainly as energy storage technology gets better and as it has a higher energy density level, there will continue to be improvements. However, for those vehicles that require high amounts, have high weight densities, require large amounts of power, the movement nationwide is towards conversions to natural gas. That's where you're given equal environmental benefit as well as longer life. I'll point you to the fact that Duluth is just right now in the midst of purchasing some electric buses up there, and my recollection is that the batteries, they have a quick charging system where they need to stop to charge every 30 to 35 minutes. So I don't know if that's the model type you're talking about. Certainly, we'll see where technology takes us, but right now, in terms of the conversions that are taking place across the country for both the operating cost and environmental benefit, on the passenger side, there seems to be more momentum towards the electric vehicle side of things. But on the heavy industrial, fleet vehicles, those very garbage trucks, buses, recycling haulers, the movement is towards natural gas.
Representative Wagenius.
Well, if I could follow up, Mr. Chair. I'm thinking about providing subsidies to people who buy from industries that are not in this state. Yet we have a good, strong bus manufacturing industry in this state, in Crookston and in St. Cloud. And so my question returns. Things are getting better, and we haven't even looked at these new models they're bringing down to demonstrate, I think it's this week. it seems to me that we should be purchasing from Minnesota facilities, and in any of these designs, just like the electric cars, they get better as folks purchase them. And we should be encouraging, if we're going to encourage manufacturers outside of this state, it seems to me that we should be encouraging manufacturers inside this state. I know. Okay, let me,
Representative Wagenius.
so I think it's time that we actually rethink this position. But the other thing I just wanted to bring up, and Representative Mahoney just alluded to it, could you share with the committee the number of items in your bill that came to the bill not as a bill or not in hearing, but just arrived?
Chair Garofalo.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Wagenius, as you know, as a member of the committee, the energy portion of the bill was shared with the public 12 days before it was introduced. It was actually posted in advance of the Easter recess, an unprecedented step to get public input. And we did that primarily because energy is a very complex area of public policy and wanted to make sure that people had the full Easter recess to review those materials. In addition, on Wednesday, when the energy articles were merged with the finance provisions in this bill, we had not one, not two, but 3 separate days of public hearings on that. Because of the integrated nature of the bill, it was very difficult to schedule hearings on just one provision. So, for example, if you look at the reforms we're making with the Renewable Development Fund and bringing that in-house, it's very difficult to just have a hearing on that without talking about the changes that we're making to the Energy Fund. Likewise, it's very difficult to discuss those two things without also talking about the reforms that we are making to net metering. And then fourth and finally, to talk about the changes we are making to our mandate system in Minnesota so that our energy is both cleaner and more affordable. And so that's why the model that I chose was to get that out there for more public disclosure, let people digest it over the Easter recess, and then have multiple days of hearings on it. Certainly a person can look at individual subject items in this bill and say that there was no hearing on them until the release date. However, there was ample time and ample public testimony over 3 separate days to take that testimony, Representative Wagenius, and I hope that other chairs follow that process going forward.
Representative Wagenius.
Well, thank you. I did appreciate looking at the bill over my Easter holiday, and I did do that. But that does not negate the ability for the public to discuss some of the issues in committee ahead of time so they just don't arrive fully grown in a bill, that we have had an opportunity in committee to, for example, getting rid of the greenhouse gas emission goals. Nobody had any idea that was going to happen. That could have been a standalone discussion. So I think we have some problems with the public input on this bill, and regret that that happened.
Members, I have Representative Liebling and Hillstrom next, but Representative Hornstein had previously approached me about someone that wanted to testify on the bill, and I've forgotten their name now, and so I want to recognize, maybe Representative Hornstein can call them down. We don't normally want to encourage testimony in this committee, since we have had testimony on a lot of issues prior to this, but at the same time, rules require us to take some if we're asked for it. And we haven't had anyone else who has asked to testify besides this individual, so I want to allow that testimony. Representative Hornstein, if you could.
Thank you. Yeah, and I appreciate that, Mr. Chair. And I know that Sue Watlow Phillips from the Metropolitan Interfaith Council on Affordable Housing is interested in speaking very briefly on this.
Yeah, Mr. Chair.
Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And the reason I had my hand up was simply to say that, you know, this is a big bill, and I have never sat on the committee. I'm sure that the public, if members of the public are watching, that they also don't know what's in this bill, and we haven't had a walkthrough of the bill. I don't know how the how you, Mr. Chair, want to phase this with the testifier, but I think it would be helpful to just simply ask Representative Garofalo to walk through the bill and just tell us what's in here. Maybe the testifier has something specific she or he, I didn't hear who it was, wants to tell us about, but at some point, I think that a lot of us would appreciate just simply understanding what this bill does.
Well, Representative Liebling, it's absolutely your prerogative to ask for more of a explanation than has provided by the walkthrough of the fiscal information that's been done so far. And so I think what I'd like to do, since the testifier is already nearly at the stand, we can maybe ask her to testify, and then I'll go back to you, Representative Liebling, and we can have Chair Garofalo give us a further walkthrough. But ma'am, if you could come forward to the witness stand, and welcome to the Committee on Ways and Means, and if you could give us your name for the record and give us your testimony.
Mr. Chair and committee members, my name is Sue Watlow Phillips. I'm the Executive Director of MICA, the Metropolitan Interfaith Council on Affordable Housing, and President and CEO of Integrated Community Solutions. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. I would agree that there are a number of pieces in here that would be very helpful to have a further walkthrough. I'd like to just testify specifically on two areas. One bill that was not heard in committee, which is House File 997, which is Housing Opportunities Made Equitable. You've received a number of pieces of information over the last couple of days about that. It's a law that we passed last year and was voted in the House of Representatives 130-0 to begin to address the disparity in home ownership between white and non-white in this state. We were the worst in the country at the beginning of 2014. We now are the third worst, greatly due to the great work of groups in this room that have been working on providing housing opportunities, longer-term home ownership training, as well as the great work by Minnesota Housing Finance Agency in using some of their own resources in putting $10.65 million in 2014, fiscal year 2014, and $10.65 million into home law activities. But again, we are the third worst behind Vermont and South Dakota. And part of the issue is, if you take a look at the information that was handed to you, the Minneapolis Federal Reserve, National Home Builders Association, the National Realtors Association, as well as the Minnesota Management and Budget, say that one of the major reasons that we're not growing as an economy is because we're not having more folks move into home ownership. And 40% of the emerging market that's ready to move into home ownership are people of color, Hispanic, Latino, and American Indians. And we need to provide a longer-term home ownership training opportunity and a little bit more flexible financing to make that happen. We know that we will, for every dollar that we put into long-term home ownership training, there's a $12 return. We also know that there's about a 2.5 times return for the dollars that we invest in the program. No defaults in homeowners, the hundreds that have already gone through this program. So it's a program that works, and the time is now to invest dollars into that. The other piece I'd like to briefly talk about is in regards to the Minnesota Housing Finance Agency budget. And I certainly think that the agency could probably give a much better testimony than I can on that, and certainly encourage you to have them up and talk about that. Certainly the impact of the housing cuts are significant. While we certainly think the Challenge Fund has been a very good way to get businesses involved in creating affordable rental in the community, the way the Challenge Fund, 10 million of the Challenge Fund with no income limits in this bill is really of great concern for us. It doesn't allow us to match with other federal resources, other state resources. It doesn't even require a local match to it. And we estimate, and again, the agency can speak much better than I can on this, is that 10 million would probably create somewhere, if you just use the 10 million for creating housing, maybe somewhere between 20 and 50 units of housing. And we have real concerns about that. And then the other cuts that we're real concerned about are the cuts to the Family Homeless Prevention Program and the Housing Trust Fund Program. Now, the Family Homeless Prevention Assistance Program is cut by $1.3 million. What we usually spend as a provider in that program for many years as the Executive Director of Elam Transitional Housing is that we spend less than $1,000 per family. So that means 1,300 families are not going to be prevented from becoming homeless. And what we're talking about with the Housing Trust Fund with the $2.4 million cut is probably somewhere between 500 and 600 households are not going to get rental assistance for a year. Now, if all those families ended up in shelters, not even all, let's just say a portion of them end up in shelter, we're going to save $3.7 million by those cuts. We're going to spend as taxpayers between $10 and $15 million in people being in shelter. Not a good use of our tax dollars. So with that, Mr. Chair, I will, in my comments, encourage you to take a look at the Housing Opportunities Made Equitable bill. It is moving forward in the Senate Finance, not certainly at the level we'd like to see it at, but it is moving there. And we certainly encourage you to really take a look at these cuts to the Minnesota Housing Finance Agency budget. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. Chair Garofalo, I'm wondering if you could provide a little bit more extensive review of the policy portions of the bill as was requested by Representative Lee.
Sure, Mr. Chairman and members, I assume that members don't want me to go through each section of the bill, do they? Or is that what members are asking me to do?
Yes?
You know, I guess,
Maybe I
Chair
should
Garofalo, I
ask
guess maybe what I would ask Representative Liebling is, she was the one who made the request. Representative Liebling, perhaps you can ask Chair Garofalo what you are requesting.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. And Representative Garofalo, I'm not I'm not trying to waste time or just do something that's burdensome to you, far from it. But I think that, I mean, I don't know what is the most convenient way for you to organize the presentation. If going through the sections of the bill helps us to understand what the bill is doing and you choose to do it that way, that would be fine. But I think some explanation of kind of the major policy changes in the bill would be warranted. And certainly, you know, I'm certainly not very familiar with energy policy or even jobs policy for that matter. And I'm sure that many of the people who might be watching us probably aren't either, and would just kind of like to know what the major thrusts of your bill are and, you know, what your policy direction is here, if you wouldn't mind. I mean, I think that's this, you know, I know you've done a lot of work on this. I know this is an area that you've been deeply involved with for quite some time, and would just kind of like to know where you would like to take the state.
Well, Chair Garofalo, members, first I would direct you to the House Research Bill Summary that has been provided to everyone in their packets, which does, I think, outline a lot of what's going on in the bill. I note in that summary there are 11 different articles. You know, perhaps one idea, Chair Garofalo, although you can approach this however you want, one idea might be to describe what's in each article. But I'll let you respond however you wish to Representative Liebling.
Sure. Well, Representative Carlson has a question, so.
Representative Carlson.
Mr. Chairman, in addition to what Representative Liebling pointed out, and in response to a question that I had earlier, Representative Mahoney pointed out that there were some items in this bill apparently that were never heard in committee, as I understood it. And so as he goes through, if he could at least identify what has appeared in the bill for whatever reason that never had a hearing or was never a part of any other bill, apparently.
Well, Representative Carlson, I guess, are you speaking of things that didn't have I mean, Representative Garofalo mentioned something like 3 days of hearings they had on the bill and presumably items that were in the bill. Are you referencing something besides that?
Well, Mr. Chair, I'm not sure what I'm referencing other than when I asked about the film board. It was pointed out by one of our colleagues on the committee that there were items in the bill that had never had a hearing. It's one thing to have a bill posted and to have perhaps a general overview, but it's quite another to have had a hearing on some specific issues. And as all I'm asking is if those could be pointed out as he walks through the bill, which items are in the bill that apparently are new relative to having had any hearings before the bill was put together. Just as a footnote to what Representative Liebling is asking through, I'm assuming as he walks through, he can tell us this is new, it had a hearing or didn't have a hearing or whatever the case might be.
Okay, Chair Davids, to that point.
Well, to that point, Mr. Chairman, I guess I've got a quick question first. Now, Garofalo, was the bill we have before us heard in your committee and passed through your committee?
Mr. Chairman.
Garofalo.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Davids, before the amendment that the committee adopted today, yes.
Okay, so then, Mr. Chairman, and two members are saying didn't have a hearing. That's a false statement. It had a hearing, and it passed to this committee. This bill had a hearing.
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Carlson.
My good friend, Representative Davids, apparently didn't listen to what I said. I said any issues that appeared in the bill that had, prior to the bill being introduced, that appeared in the bill, that hadn't had a hearing prior to that. There is a difference between a walkthrough like this with items that have appeared, and especially if they're substantive, and that's what we're really talking about, that have appeared where they're just part of a walkthrough like we're having today, as opposed to of a hearing like Representative Davids has in his committee. He thoroughly hears every bill, and then the bill is put together, and then we have a walkthrough on the tax committee. That's the process that we do, and I was left with the impression, at least when I asked about the film board, that apparently there weren't any hearings on the film board per se, and then there was language and numbers changes as a result of the film board. But I don't think I'm asking about anything complicated. I'm just saying, you know, whether there had been a prior hearing on a given issue as he walks through. I don't want to hold up the committee, as Representative Liebling pointed out, she doesn't either.
Mr. Chairman?
Sure, Chair Garofalo.
I would just say that if the minority caucus is upset about some of the provisions that we put into this bill and then only had the 3 days and hearings on it, I can write an amendment to delete some of those provisions out of the bill. I can do that.
Representative Carlson.
Mr. Chairman, I am just soliciting information. I'm not saying I'm upset one way or the other. I can't be upset if I don't know.
Chair Garofalo, I think you've heard the different requests from people. I would say that, I mean, if there is something that is not put in the bill, I guess to me, you don't necessarily need to have a hearing to not put something in the bill. But Chair Garofalo, I'll let you handle this and give us an overview as you wish based on the various questions you've heard.
Mr. Chairman, I thought Representative Davids covered it pretty clearly, but I will state it again, that the energy provisions of this bill were released and were available to the public for input for almost 2 weeks. And then when the full bill was released on Wednesday, we heard not one, not two, but 3 separate days of testimony because of the interlinking nature of this bill. So this bill had numerous hearings, numerous public vetting. We literally sat and took public testimony until there was nobody there who wanted to talk anymore. So that's, when I hear people say that we didn't have a public hearing on it, I don't understand what they are saying, but I will go through the bill, and if my overview of the bill is not thorough enough, I am happy to continue to talk about it. My intent was to be respectful of senior members' time and to provide the top-level overview, but I can go into more, I will go into the detail the committee wishes that I do, Mr. Chairman.
Members, I see a few questions, but I think let's let Chair Garofalo go through the bill some more, and perhaps the questions will be answered. And then if they aren't, I'll come back to those who have questions.
Mr. Chair, to that
Representative
point.
Davids.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, to that point. I thought this was a finance committee. I care about the numbers. I don't care about what he did for policy at this point. Of course, Greg Davids cares deeply about all things. But this is a finance committee. I don't want to hear about policy in this committee. I want to hear about numbers, money. That's what I care about. The policy has been debated a lot, and will continue to be debated. So I hope Chair Garofalo is not going to be going through policy this bill.
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Carlson.
If I may, on that point, I asked 2 questions earlier. Basically, I got a non-answer on both of those questions. And policy does drive the numbers. And the purpose that we're here for today is to understand a major appropriations bill. And there may be some things in here that aren't tied to any appropriation, but I assume that most of what's in the bill, if there's language dealing with what that appropriation number is, that would be defined as policy, but it's very much a part of understanding the fiscal impact of the bill. And when I asked both those questions, I quite honestly, and I was willing to accept it on the first one, I said I would check later on the Bureau of Mediation Services to see what the story was behind that reduction and what that meant for that agency. So there's, I assume, some policy other than just a tough target that drove the arrival at that number. I asked about the film board and got the same kind of an answer. And then another member of the committee pointed out that there were some issues in the bill that apparently hadn't had a discussion before they appeared in the bill. But in all due respect to Representative David's comments, there is a tie between policy and appropriations, and that's what we should be looking at.
Okay, Chair Garofalo, let's, members, I think let's let Chair Garofalo give us a further review of the bill, and then if people have questions, we can ask Chair Garofalo some more questions. Chair Garofalo.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, page 3, Article 1, Subdivision 2 contains the funding for the Minnesota Investment Fund. Contained with that, in that is a $2 million loan to construct a aircraft facility. This is a Cirrus facility up in Duluth. On page 4, this is a $2 million item also from the Minnesota Investment Fund. This would be awarded to communities that meet a specific list of criteria, not limited to the fact that they're currently receiving broadband service outages, that businesses are actually being lost, and that there have to be an agreement between the private and public partnership of that item. Next are the appropriations for the Minnesota Job Creation Fund, as well as the appropriations for contaminated site cleanup and development grants. In addition, under that, $700,000 each year from the remediation fund is contained in those provisions. There's $1.425 million allocated to a competitive grant program for business development. $4.1 million from the Job Skills Partnership is appropriated, and if that appropriation is not sufficient, the appropriation for other years is available. Next is a $1 million general fund grant to the Enterprise Minnesota, and of that, $750,000 will be used for the small growth proposal. We fund money for the Center for Rural Policy and Development in this bill. In addition, we have money here for the Workforce Housing Grants Pilot Program. In addition, there is $5 million total in fiscal years 16 and 17 for additional workforce housing programs. You'll notice line 6.23, fiscal years 16 and 17. This is a Gunther provision to allow for a grant to develop and implement Southern and Southwestern Initiative for Collaboration Pilot Project. Moving on. The Business Development Center in Mankato is funded on page 7. This is on the middle of page 8. You'll see dollars are given to the neighborhood development centers for model outreach and training activities in Greater Minnesota, a one-time appropriation. Within the Workforce Development Fund, we have the $3.2 million for the competitive grant program, as well as $3.5 million in each year for the Workforce Development Fund for youth programming. There's $1 million for youth build, $200,000 for diversified industry, $2.848 million in the year is for Workforce Development Fund for the Youth Workforce Development Competitive Grant Program. So this is something that people would apply for. There's $1.5 million each year for the Fast Track program. Next, you'll see that there's the appropriation for the OIC centers. There is an additional investment in OICs for the East Metro and St. Paul OIC, as well as the Indian OIC in Bemidji. You'll see that there's the funds for the Boys and Girls Clubs. Money for the Big Brothers and Big Sisters. $2 million to a grant to the Minnesota High Tech Association for STEM internship opportunities. $500,000 to Resource Inc. You'll see there is a grant to the St. Cloud Area Somali Salvation Organization. Some report card requirements and workforce development to make sure we get the right metrics and right data and these funds are doing well. Money for the YWCA in St. Paul for training and job placement assistance. Twin Cities Rise. A customized training program that is developed for Central Lakes College, Minnesota West Community and Technical College, as well as South Central College. General support services for the Olmsted Implementation Office. The funding of portions of the Minnesota Trade Office, as well as the Vocational Rehabilitation Program funding. Section 4, we can move into Minnesota Housing Finance Agency. There's some language in there involving aspirational goals for the program. Next is the Challenge Grant Program, where what will happen is $5 million is prioritized out of this fund for workforce housing in specific communities that meet specific criteria that are listed on 17 and 18. In addition, we provide a floor and a ceiling there to make sure that that those monies are appropriate with a focus on workforce housing as well as in greater Minnesota. We modify the language to allow the financing of new modular homes and other additional mechanisms. You'll note that those are the appropriation allocations on page 19 for each geographic area, and the priorities specified in which ones of those areas have. Move to page 20. This is the Housing Trust Fund appropriations, as well as the appropriations for rental assistance for the mentally ill. In addition, the Family Homeless Prevention appropriation. We see additional funds here for home ownership, as well as Affordable Rental Investment Fund. Additional dollars are put into the, here's the funding for the Housing Rehabilitation Program, as well as the Rental Rehabilitation Program. And Subdivision 10 is where we have homeownership education and training. You see the capacity building grants, and there's also funding for competitive grants, so that the Commissioner of Housing Finance should establish a competitive grant program to serve women and children at risk of being homeless or who have been victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, human trafficking, an international abusive marriage, or forced marriage. The Explore Minnesota Tourism appropriation here, this is where their funding comes from. The Department of Labor and Industries items that are listed here. Workman's Comp has from their funds, is a significant investment in technology to upgrade their worker compensation system. We move into labor standards and apprenticeship. This is the items that are funded in this portion of the bill. There's a workplace safety fund that you can see funds go to. Construction codes and services, you'll notice that there's a different number there. That's because we accepted the governor's budget recommendation on repealing or on temporarily reducing some license fees. Pleasure to work with Commissioner Peterson, and I'm happy to work with him on that. The Bureau of Mediation Services, you see their items here, as well as Workers' Compensation Court of Appeals. Here's the Department of Commerce appropriations for the section, as well as the Petroleum Tank Release Compensation Board, which again we modified that transfer, so it's not taking place. Page 29.27, you'll notice that there is $1.6 million to the Commissioner of Human Services to supplement the ongoing operational expenses for the Commission of the Deaf, Blind, and Hard of Hearing in Minnesota. Funding for the Legislative Coordinating Commission for captioning of legislative coverage, as well as Min-IT. There's the enforcement provisions. In the area of energy resources, this is the energy fund. This will be used for distributed generation incentive payments, $22 million in fiscal year 16, $23 million in 2017. $400,000 in each fiscal year from the energy fund would then be used for a business incubator and developer with the requirements of private sector contributions to meet that. And so that the goals of that accelerator program are listed in that section of the bill. In addition, moving now into page 32, there is $7 million deposit from the general fund into the energy fund to help fund some of the other items that are listed in there. You'll see that there is a 10.
If I may, I'm not sure this is exactly what we were asking for. I kept referring to where there were substantive changes that would impact on the budget. And what we're getting now, with all due respect, is really basically just a walk through that we had by looking at the numbers. So maybe in the interest of time, if Representative Garofalo would be willing to just, as he goes through the bill, point out where there's substantive policy changes that are impacting on the budget. I think that's our role here. I don't think that we need to go through it. If, with all due respect, Representative Garofalo, I think we may have had a miscommunication in terms of what we may have been asking for here.
Well, Representative Carlson, I think these are certainly substantive expenditures and such, but if the feeling of the committee is that they want a
if
higher
that's the
level
way-
overview, we certainly probably could leave that up to
I
Representative
think
Garofalo.
that's what I was asking for, was a higher level overview and kind of an identification of what may have been new initiatives within here, but I'll leave it up to Representative Garofalo on how he wants to proceed.
Okay,
Basically, what kind of set this off was we went through the spreadsheet, and there was virtually no comment about a 200-page bill or whatever it is in terms of what was in the bill. And that, at least for me, was a bit of a red flag. So the best way to make sure we leave here with some basic understanding of what this bill is all about, what some of the substantive changes are to state policy that are impacting on the appropriation.
Representative Anderson.
Well, Mr. Chair, I've had the opportunity to serve on the Ways and Means for several terms here, and what we're doing here and what Representative Garofalo has done far exceeds anything that I've ever seen, including the time that you were chair as Ways and Means, Representative Carlson. And I think we're setting a new precedence, and be interested to see in future years when we hear bills in the Ways and Means Committee. This will certainly change how we operate in Ways and Means. And I know at least the last 4 years, we haven't had people come and testify or do things like that to this extent that we're seeing here today. So this is a new precedence, and if people want to set a new precedence for the Ways and Means Committee, that will carry on to the future years, and that's just really interesting for me. So this is a new day, and I'll remember this moment. So thank you.
Okay, Representative Carlson, I'll let you respond to that. And then I do want to let Chair Garofalo continue his high-level presentation. Representative Carlson.
We've always had a general walkthrough of a major bill like this. That's just not an accurate comment. And I wasn't requesting the detail that he was going through. If he prefers to do it that way, that's fine. But I was interested in what there might be substantive changes in the bill that affect state policy and the numbers that are in the bill. That's what I was asking for, and not necessarily a line by the appropriations, because that's here. That, I think, has been the long history of the committee. And yes, Representative Anderson, we did have testimony from time to time, just as we did here today, both when you were in the majority and when we were in the majority. So that's an accurate statement. What the general policy was, we would ask if there was anybody that hadn't had an opportunity in a previous committee to testify and wanted to testify, just as you did here today. That was very, very open.
I'll tell you what,
But,
Mr.
we're
Chairman.
taking a lot of time, and I think if that helps, if it's Representative Garofalo's bill, so however he wants to walk through it, but I, in the interest of time, was trying to say what is substantive in the bill, what are some of the substantive changes in state policy that impact on the budget, the bottom line, and that's all I was asking for. If he wants to provide more than that, that's fine. And I'm not interested in setting any new precedent other than what we've done in the past.
Well, members, in the interest of time, as Representative Carlson mentioned, how about if we let Chair Garofalo continue to go through his bill?
At whatever level he chooses.
Chair Garofalo.
Okay, well, I heard Representative Carlson say whatever I choose, and I like that answer. That's a good one. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of at a higher level overview, then just pick out certain sections in the bill. I mean, obviously, you know, as the author of the bill, I think every provision is substantive and every part of it's nice. I was trying to do a courtesy to the committee. I know that it's a Friday and some members have to travel for the weekend. I know that this bill has been out there for over a week, so members have had a lot of time to review it, and some members would even prefer to have their questions be to ask them on the House floor. But that being said, I'm happy to talk about this bill. Sometimes I talk about it too much, so I'll take another crack at it and just highlight some of the top level views. And if members want me to go more in depth on that, I'm happy to do that. Or if I'm going too much in depth, I'm happy to stop talking too. That's fine as well. A couple of things. First of all, in the area of tax relief, this bill provides almost $600 million in immediate tax relief to the businesses across the state of Minnesota. Now, second of all, there are significant investments for workforce housing. For those that don't know, in many of our communities in greater Minnesota, there's a huge problem where we have a market breakdown. And quite simply, we have businesses that want to hire work. Good.
Keep going, Representative.
Oh, no, we're going to answer questions as we go, Representative.
Mr. Chair.
Chair Garofalo, I think I would prefer that you finish going through the bill, and then we'll take people's questions, and then we can answer them after you've gone through your overview.
Okay. So again, almost $600 million in unemployment insurance tax reductions for the small businesses in Minnesota. Second of all is that unprecedented investment in workforce housing coming from existing funds. For those that don't know, in greater Minnesota, they have a market breakdown. Thanks, Steve. A market breakdown where we have businesses that want to grow, they want to hire people, they have found the worker that they are interested in. The problem is there just simply isn't any workforce housing in that environment. Because of an abundance of government subsidized healthcare, government subsidized housing, it screws up the appraisal process. So what we're doing is sort of a surge, an investment in these communities to get the housing market jump started and running, and that gives us the opportunity to allow to get the market over there fixed. Next is there's significant reform in energy legislation. The first thing we do is we take a look at we revisit some of these ideas that are out there. Number one is that clean hydro, going forward, new hydroelectricity will qualify as a renewable energy technology. The reason why it would qualify as a renewable energy technology is because it is a renewable energy technology. Second of all, under the previous solar mandate that was passed into law, there were a couple of provisions that are not providing value to taxpayers. One of those is that 10% of all solar installations have to be small scale. We took testimony in committee that showed that this provides, actually it spends more money with minimal environmental benefit. Utility scale solar and community scale solar reduce more pollution and do it at a lower price. In addition, we eliminate the cloquet carve-out, the carve-out for the Iron Range that exempted them from the solar costs. And then finally, with regards to that, if a utility makes a determination that they're able to get power that is just as clean as solar energy, just as affordable as solar energy, and it's, if they can do that and do it at a cheaper price, then they have the flexibility to meet that requirement. In addition, for our munis and co-ops, we have net metering reform, and this ties into a more complex area of regulation, specifically this idea of when somebody has distributed generation and they're using the grid as a battery, who pays for it? Do they get to use it for free and shift the burden onto their neighbors, or do they have to pay a standby charge? Do they have to pay for using the grid? So we put together a uniquely Minnesota approach. And what it says is that those people are going to get their incentive payments. However, instead of it coming at the expense of funding our grid, we're going to make sure that we have it come from the state of Minnesota. And this way, it doesn't pit neighbors against each other in local opposition to distributed generation. In addition, there's a $45 million distributed generation incentive program that's put up for not just rooftop solar, but also for solar thermal, for small-scale wind, for energy storage, and geothermal. The Renewable Development Fund back in 2011 was something that was transferred, that Republican majorities tried to sort of insulate the politicians from it, let the professionals do it, allocate those funds, and that worked for about a year. The subsequent session, $175 million.
Chairman,
Representative Khan.
if we could have a reference to what page in the bill we're on, it would be really helpful.
Okay, Representative Garofalo, please continue with your overview, but maybe
Just one
give
for
us
one.
a reference on your page here and there.
Oh, okay. If members want to turn to their hymnals and go to Article 9,
yeah.
Section 1.
We need to pray for
What?
If you go to Article 9, Section 2, this is where we set up the Energy Fund account. You'll remember, Representative Khan, that the Renewable Development Fund in 2011 went through significant reforms to insulate it from the legislature and to insulate it from political pressure. The subsequent year, the legislature passed and enacted a proposal to take $175 million out of that fund, primarily for rooftop solar as well as made in Minnesota solar. And whether people should have access to get those funds or not, reasonable people can disagree. But by taking it in, making it a fund of the state general fund, now this makes sure that all groups have access to compete for those dollars as opposed to a few politically connected ones. Going back to Representative Khan, I'm looking for the natural gas vehicles and electric vehicles incentives because I know that you'd like those. It's delicious. I just do not have the page numbers memorized, I'm sorry, but I'll find it in a second here. So Representative Khan,
Page 149.
if you go to 149, this is Section 8, Article 11, Section 8. This is where we have electric vehicle rebates. The focus of the energy policy in our committee was that energy should always be cleaner as well as cheaper. And in the past, we had to make a choice. We had to decide that if we wanted cleaner energy, we had to pay more. Likewise, if we wanted more affordable energy, then we had to pollute more. And because of breakthroughs in energy technology and because of advances in energy efficiency, that's just simply no longer the case. Now we can put forward some smart plans that allow us to pay less and pollute less. And one of the programs in here is a $2,500 rebate for electric vehicles, which have significant environmental benefit. While there are zero tailpipe emissions, obviously at some point there are emissions generated, but this program is limited to Xcel customers. And the majority of Xcel's energy sources come from carbon-free sources. And so as people convert from gas mobiles to electric vehicles, there's a significant environmental savings. And also what it does is it puts a little extra demand onto the grid, which is a good thing. That allows a larger rate base and allows more customers to be picking up more of the fixed costs of maintaining the grid. In addition, page 150. 152, this is a provision from Representative Anzel's, the competitive rate for energy-intensive, trade-exposed electric utility customers. Up in the Iron Range and those heavy power-intensive industries, they've seen energy rates as high as 40 to 50% higher over the last couple of years. Now, there's various reasons that account for that, but the most important thing is that with the economic stress that we're seeing in northern Minnesota, they cannot have a cost structure on their energy that's out of whack with the rest of the nation and the world. And so this would allow them to petition to the Public Utilities Commission to make that change. The bottom of 155 into 156, this is the natural gas vehicles and propane vehicles, and these are used as incentives to replace diesel burning vehicles, those with high and heavy particulate matter, mostly in a fleet vehicle concept. And again, Representative Khan, if you compare this to the existing incentive programs, these are reducing more pollution than under current law. In addition, they are more affordable than under current law, so it's something that the committee was enthusiastic about and liked. The beginning of Article...
Representative Khan, I'd
Skipping over a part of the bill that I think has significant cost implications.
Okay, well, let's let
going on?
Chair Garofalo finish his presentation, and then we'll put you on the list, and you can ask about your questions.
Well,
Chair Garofalo.
Well, I thought he was going through the important parts of the bill, so,
Well, I think he is.
okay.
Well, Mr. Chairman and members of the DFL, I am happy to answer questions on the sections of the bill that you want me to. I've been criticized for being too little. I was criticized for going too much in depth. Now I'm not talking about the stuff that individual members want me to talk about Just tell me just ask me about the sections you want me to ask about, and I'll answer it. I'm not going
Chair,
anywhere.
Chair Garofalo, I'd like you to finish off your presentation as best as you can see fit, and then members can ask you either about things that you said or things they feel were left unsaid. So please continue, Chair Garofalo.
I mean, I did try to do that, Mr. Chairman.
Well, keep trying. I know you're trying. I know you've been trying to do that so far, and I guess I would just ask that you continue on through the rest of your presentation, Chair Garofalo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Some other provisions that are in the bill. Representative Khan, Article 6. Oh, so page 64.
What? Aren't we going backwards now?
Chair Garofalo.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, this is the, maybe a provision you were interested in. This is the two-tiered minimum wage. Maybe sometime you can tell the story of the legislature where this idea came from. Also, this includes the Davney provision. This is the bill we debated on the House floor. Next, if you look at page 68, section 6, and this is the standardization of minimum wages. There's been a concern that Minneapolis or St. Paul may be subject to a higher minimum wage and therefore would not be able to compete with neighboring communities. And so this is a standardization. You know, right now we have a standardization that the minimum wage can't go below a certain level. This would make sure that it just keeps these things identical so that we don't have communities losing businesses to one another. So, Mr. Chairman, I've highlighted, I think, some of the items that I think are important in this bill. I think the focuses would be that workforce housing is a big winner in greater Minnesota. In addition, some big energy changes that are going to make energy cleaner as well as cheaper. And most importantly, it's going to have the legislature be an equal partner in all the state of Minnesota in Minnesota's energy future. So I'm happy to take questions, or if there's other sections of the bill that members wish me to address, I'm happy to talk about those as well.
All right, members, now we'll take questions. Representative Khan, let me recognize you first, and then I'll go to Representative Hillstrom and through the rest of the list.
Okay. The question that I'm interested in, the issue that I'm interested in is Article 151. Well, problem with doing it this way is that it's hard to find them once you've lost them. Why don't you go to the next?
I learned that earlier.
Okay, we'll go back to you then, Representative
Okay.
Khan. Representative Hillstrom.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Representative Garofalo, I've spoken to you about one of these issues. Representative Garofalo, I'm very much opposed to your repeal of my gold coin legislation that I passed. Members, this is one of those issues that wasn't even introduced as a bill this year, didn't have a hearing, and then was placed in the bill, and the only hearing that it got was when it was part of this greater omnibus hearing, or this greater bill hearing in committee. So Representative Garofalo, we've talked about it already. I've told you that I'm going to get you some information, but members, I'm very concerned about this. Regulation of gold coins has become very important and ultimately has resulted in folks ending up in federal prison as they're stealing money from our seniors. And so by undoing this, I think you're going to make it easier, once again, for people to scam our seniors. So Representative Garofalo, I'll get you the information that you requested, and hopefully I'll have all the names before we get to the floor as I offer an amendment to take it out. Mr.
Okay, Representative Hillstrom.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And then I have one other piece. I just figured while I have the floor, I'll tell you about both of my issues. The second is I'm very opposed to the telecom deregulation that you have in your bill. And I believe that landlines are very important and they're a basic necessity for older Minnesotans. And members, contrary to what you're hearing from the telecom industry, landlines are not dead, and they are not a text message and email is not a good substitution for a landline. You can't call 911 with a text message. You can't call 911 with an email. Not in Minnesota. So Representative Garofalo, what this is going to do is it's going to make it so that senior citizens who happen to live at the end of the farm row, the last one on the street, are not going to have the ability to have landlines because they're not going to be offered. And members, if you have seniors who have medical issues, many of the medical devices now have the ability to put the landline phone up to your medical device, like your pacemaker, and they can give readings and send them right to the hospital. You can't put a cell phone next to a pacemaker. Not if you want to live anyways. It's not recommended. So Representative Garofalo, I think you have some serious public safety issues, and I think that you should take that out of your bill as well. That's it, Mr. Chair.
Representative Khan, did you find the
Yes.
reference you wanted to ask about? Representative Khan.
Yes. Well, Mr. Chairman and Representative Garofalo, I'm interested in Article 11, Section 13, where you eliminate the nuclear moratorium that we've had in place for quite a while. In fact, one of the experts, one of the Conference Committee members is sitting next to me at this time. And I'm not concerned, and I'll probably have an amendment at some later date, with relieving the nuclear moratorium as long as we put some conditions on the information that we need in place, which would not be a cost to the state, because it would be, the way we would write it would probably totally require the power, whoever's proposing it, to do it. But the thought that this could have no additional costs to the state, I would just ask you to look at the costs to the country of Japan that has recently, that they have, not recently, over the past 4 or 5 years, because of nuclear power plants. So as I said, I don't object to to getting rid of the line that, the simple line that says new construction prohibited. But I do think we are required, when you look at what this is additional storage of spent nuclear fuel. I really think we have to put some language in on who and how that's going to be paid for and have some idea of it. So I tend, just warning in advance, I intend to have an amendment that would not bring back the moratorium, but would put sensible conditions on what construction could entail. I think we also look at the places in the country where new nuclear power plants are being constructed. I think it's in the southeastern part of the country. I think the costs have been unbelievably escalated. And I don't think that matters as long as those costs are all on the power company and they're not passed on to the consumers before the plant is even operative. But I just want to know what thought went, I noticed when you went through it, you totally skipped over that section, and I'd just like to know what thought went into deciding that this was a necessary thing to put into this bill at this time.
Chair Garofalo.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Khan, a couple of points. First of all, each of the concerns you mentioned are 100% valid, and those are all concerns and questions that the Public Utilities Commission would make in part of their determination if a new power plant was going to be built. Second of all is that something that is different now compared to previous energy debates is that we now have, proposed federal rules which will go live this summer, which for the first time are going to regulate greenhouse gas emissions from new power plants and existing power plants. The Prairie Island and Monticello nuclear power plants will be, currently their license expire within 20 years. We're entering into the 15-year time frame, which may sound like a really long time, but when it comes to siting large generation, it's something that we need to be considering now. And if Monticello and if Prairie Island are shut down, as technology exists today, and you merge that with the new greenhouse gas targets we have from the federal government, we're in trouble. I mean, you just cannot, there is no carbon-free base load power source other than nuclear, unless you count energy efficiency as a base load power source. But so those are the factors that played into it. Representative Khan, your points are absolutely valid. Certainly, there's a lot of research going. Bill Gates is putting a lot of money into this new sort of modular nuclear reactor thing, and we'll see if it has promise or not. But we're entering the time frame here where if Monticello and Prairie Island shut down, and we're running up against new emissions caps, we're not going to be able to build new base load power. That's kind of the way we're heading towards, and that should be something. That should be a pause for concern for all policymakers.
So
Representative Khan.
So get me some, I suppose I should be able to figure it out myself from our rules, but some idea about when this bill will be on the floor and when amendments for this bill will be available. Because from what you've said, I actually will be very glad to bring you an amendment, which I will ask you to co-author with me.
Chair Garofalo.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Khan, I think I would assume sometime next week I'll be on the floor, but I don't know which day.
Okay.
All right. Hope gives me at least the weekend to work on.
Representative Gunther, I had you on the list earlier. Did you still have something you wanted to say? Oh. Representative Hornstein.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Representative Garofalo loves Section 8. Thank you. Electric car rebates are very, oops, okay, yeah, sorry. Can't say nice things from this end. No, but I do appreciate that. But no, you'll like what I say now. But that's pretty much where it stops. But the provision I would like to ask you about that I have some concern about is, and I don't have the exact citation, but I understand that the bill has some provisions that may result in delaying some of the implementation of the renewable energy standard. And, you know, we passed in the House in 2013 a provision I authored that actually accelerated the renewable energy standard and increased some of the goals. And part of the rationale for that, and I think part of the reason that the House passed that, is that the utilities are actually doing a pretty good job with you know, reaching those goals that we, on a very strong bipartisan vote, I want to remind the committee in 2007 when we passed that standard, I think we had 110 members, something like that, vote for it, and Governor Pawlenty signed it. So this is good bipartisan policy that we implemented. And so my understanding is if that a utility can prove that you know, their costs have increased, then they can reduce the time frame by which they're complying with this. And I just think that's a little bit arbitrary. And I think our policy should be going in the opposite direction, which is the direction that the House passed a couple years ago, which is actually increasing the renewable energy standard. So just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Chair Garofalo.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Hornstein, so I believe the section you're looking at here is page 127, lines 16 through 19. Is that the language you're
Correct.
talking about?
Yep.
Okay. And so what it says is that, you know, it's important to remember that each utility and each rate-paying organization in Minnesota is different. So, for example, Minnesota Power and Xcel Energy right now are far above the renewable energy targets, not because
Correct.
it's being mandated, but because if you need to build new generation, the cheapest form, subsidies or no subsidies, the cheapest form of new generation, Representative Hornstein, is wind. And so that's why it's getting built. What this does is for those areas that are in a different situation than Minnesota Power or Xcel, and that really doesn't offer them that opportunity, we want to make sure that affordability is part of the dialogue. And so, as I mentioned earlier, there's some very energy-intensive industries that can suffer massive consequences from higher energy prices. And energy prices, for various reasons, have risen substantially for many of our power users across the state. And what this does is this recognizes that if this takes place, this situation where the activities under this section do require additional costs, that they're allowed to delay it. Now, I'll tell you, in its practical effect, Representative Hornstein, again, the largest power users in the state right now are already above that. It's not really an issue, but I understand your concern, and I think I would just ask people to be kind of aware of the fact that as we go forward, we want our energy to be both cleaner and more affordable.
Representative Hornstein.
Well, thanks, Mr. Chair. It seems to me that we need to be providing the incentives, you know, the carrots and sticks for all utilities to be moving in the direction of renewables and implementing responsibilities under the renewable energy standard. And my concern is this does move us, I believe, in the other direction, and it kind of sends the wrong message. So that's a particular concern I have, and I agree with Representative Khan on the nuclear moratorium. You had mentioned affordability, paying less for utilities. Nuclear power has been historically and remains, bar none, the most expensive way to generate new power. When you look at what is it, Representative Khan, you always talk about the Price-Anderson Act. You know, if you add up all of these externalities and the sheer capital costs of of building one of these facilities, and the mining and transportation of uranium, and the fact that we don't even have a permanent repository for the waste. And, you know, Yucca Mountain is not happening. There's no plan to replace that, so it's gonna keep piling up in Red Wing and near Monticello. So I just think that's another one where we're just sending the wrong message by lifting the moratorium. But those are my concerns, Mr. Chair, and I know members have other questions. So.
Representative Mahoney. You want to yield to Representative Khan?
Actually, Mr. Chair, I will bring up one particular piece that was I'm kind of at a loss for the correct word, but really made me uncomfortable. But it is a record for this particular bill, as far as I know, in the Jobs Committee, because Representative Gunther and I both served on the Jobs for, it seems, almost forever. But earlier, I'm not even sure if they're still here, but earlier today I passed out a letter from the commissioners that this bill affects. And they had a total of 78 concerns or objections that they wrote about. And I've never known a bill out of our division that would have that many concerns with it. I know that the commissioners were all here because the governor had indicated that he wanted to make sure everyone knew where his concerns were with any bill, and this one in particular. So members, it was passed out. There was concerns from many different things. I know that either the commissioners or one of their representatives are here, and it covers deed. And, and you took care of a bit of the border-to-border broadband, or the chair of this committee did. It has issues on housing, economic development programs, trade offices, Bureau of Mediation Services. In the Commerce Division, it's got insurance regulation, it's got some investment issues. We've got all the energy pieces that the governor has seemed to want his commissioners to weigh in on. Members, there's any number of different issues in here. And again, the housing, I was kind of shocked. I think housing had, let's see, I did total them up. I think housing had 23 concerns with this particular bill at this point in time. So, again, I'm not sure if the commissioners are here. I would suspect that the representatives are here. I would ask that members take a look at this particular letter. And if the commissioners are here, and if people have questions about these particular issues, Mr. Chair, I would hope that you would bring them down, because I took a look at this bill when it first came out, when Representative Garofalo presented it in committee. And I read the first 4 pages. And I haven't been really concerned about it because, although the governor has not said this, I am pretty sure that this bill, if it landed on his desk, would be vetoed. And I haven't lost any sleep over this particular bill. Everything from the nuclear moratorium to housing concerns, to tip penalty bills, to the UI trust. You alluded to a $600 million business tax cuts in here. I can only track about $500 million, and what that is money out of the UI trust fund, which is how we're going to pay for unemployment. And if you read the reports from the uninsured, the unemployment insurance groups, they're very concerned. They're very, very, very concerned. They believe that is way over the top. They offered a compromise, and it was rejected. I could go on, but again, Mr. Chair, if, I'll stop here for the time being. If the commissioners, if you want to call on any commissioners or people have questions about this, if they had a chance to look at it. But I want people to know, and I think the governor wants people to know, that he has concerns with this particular bill.
Representative Khan.
Just a quick question back to the nuclear moratorium. Representative Garofalo, would you be willing to consider, as part of the amendment, getting rid of the Price-Anderson Act for the state of Minnesota?
Chair Garofalo.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Khan, I would not.
It's a yes or no question.
You said no.
He answered.
Oh, no. Oh, okay.
Okay. Members, other discussion of the bill, we do have the letters provided by the commissioners that Representative Mahoney referenced. Members, we have had no testimony on this bill in Chair Garofalo's committee. I did take some testimony earlier from one individual that came forward and contacted a member who did want to testify. There was no one else that requested to testify before the start of the committee. I don't want to say that we're not going to take testimony if someone's got a burning question they want to ask someone, but at the same time, we don't try to rehash a lot of testimony that's already been done in other committees in this committee either. So members, I want to be respectful both of those who have questions, but also of everyone else's time and the fact that this has already had, I know, a lot of other previous testimony. With that, members, are there other questions people would like to bring up or comments? Chair Garofalo? Oh, Representative Mahoney.
It doesn't look like there's any closing remarks, so I will have my closing remarks on this particular bill, as I've sat through a number of hearings, some for bills in the bill and some not. But I did want to note that the Commissioner of Housing is here, the Commissioner of Department of Labor and Industry is here, the person running deed is here, and the Bureau of Mediation Services are here. So these letters are very valid, and I certainly hope that as we move forward, we take these into consideration, and we don't just take it as another letter that landed on our desk and put it in the recycling before we really look at it.
Did you hear that?
But, Mr. Chair,
Representative Mahoney.
thank you, and Representative Garofalo. Your committee has been interesting to be on. It has had some fun moments, some moments when you wanted to shut me down and you knew better. But I'm going to go over your bill. There's a little bit of policy, and I apologize for that, members, but I think the policy does drive the money. Members, this bill does not fund the job creation and the Minnesota Investment Fund at the level that the governor has requested. And Deed has used all the money that, and he didn't ask for anything more than what was in the base. This, the job creation and the MIF fund created 4,000 jobs in this state. Family supporting living wage jobs. And pretty evenly split. A little heavier in the metro area, but about a 48, 52, maybe 46, 54%. I had to do rough math on my phone. So it was very evenly split, almost a little bit more than where the population centers are. You heard the woman testifying. Your housing finance piece really does make huge concerns, and it reduces the number of housing units that are likely to be built rather than increase it, particularly for workforce development, workforce housing, I should say. You did take care of the broadband a little bit, although I fully understand your concerns about that. But we heard testimony. I've had people in my office saying satellite and and wireless is not where it needs to be for at least 20 and probably 30 years. So I don't think it's appropriate for Minnesota to stand still for 20, 30 years. And yes, there is a lot of federal money coming, but that was coming anyhow. And this $200 million is really what's needed above and beyond that federal money. You know, the Commerce Division had probably the longest. They have 40-plus issues that they are concerned about, everything from 43, okay, from insurance concerns and how they are going to pay their investigators that say, yes, this is a good insurance policy and should be sold in the state of Minnesota. And we have a substantial insurance industry here, and we shouldn't be shortchanging that particular industry. And then your bill does, because it does not pay their salaries, and these people will either have to be laid off or work for free. You kill off 3 out of the 4 trade offices in your bill. The last year, we've had a huge campaign on Greater Minnesota Business Development Infrastructure Grants. And and we heard bills in your committee. We did hear bills on that in your committee that got pretty much about $20 million. And you gave just a little over 10% in cash, which is about a third of what was done last year under the Democrats. And I have yet to get an apology when they said that, well, I won't go there. I'll just let that go. Your Workforce Development Fund. You took every dime. You left about $1 million in there. Now, we've taken money out of the Workforce Development Fund for job training, for this, for anything to do with how we train somebody. But we also match it with general fund. And you break the compact with business by doing what you did. You said that the state of Minnesota has no input, no skin in the game in this job training because you're using all this money that we typically use in case of layoffs. Or when people get laid off, they can go find retraining, whether you're 25 or 55. There will not be any money left in this fund. We have always left $10 million. You leave 1.3, I think it is. And you alluded to that tax cut that you were going to do for business, which is really taking more money out of the UI trust funds. Again, failing workers in this state, whether it's through the Workforce Development Fund or taking money away from the UI trust fund. You know, I have a sneaky suspicion that the energy stuff will be debated on the House floor extensively. So I won't spend too much time on that. But Representative Garofalo, in your energy policy, and again, this is, members, I want to apologize because I know this isn't a policy committee. There was no step to it. You just reached in, grabbed energy policy that we've worked on and done and pushed forward partisanly and bipartisanly, ripped it out and threw it to the side. That's fine. That's what I said this in committee. I'll say it again. You might want to go back and fund the Bureau of Mediation Services because I think that's the only way you're going to get some of your energy through, because you're going to have to bring people together rather than just do it in your office with 2 or 3 people. And maybe, I don't know, I won't go there. Again, you put in tip penalty. You put in the statewide minimum wage, which really takes local control away. If a township or a city or a county wants to require a a contract or people doing work for that city or that township or that county to pay a living wage with benefits and actually treat people with respect and give them sick time off or vacation time, they don't have that ability with your bill. You've taken local control. And you're the party of local control, I hear. At least that's what you say. Yes. Here's another good one. 87 news stories have been done about the unclaimed property. And you kept the unclaimed property language in your bill, but you took the money to pay for it out. Yeah, you did. So members, I can make a snide comment or I could make something silly here, but I'm not going to go down that particular road. I know I'm going to ask for a roll call on this vote, Mr. Chair. And I know how the result will be. It'll be somewhere 12, 17, 4, and 6 or 8 against, somewhere in that neck of the woods. And this will be debated on the floor, and it will be a long debate, and we'll have lots of other things. But as we move to the floor, as we move to the House, understand that the commissioners felt strongly enough about this that they wrote a letter and they sat through one of these committees willing to answer questions about your bill. And they had 78 concerns, and only one of them was minorly taken care of. Even if it was a negotiation ploy in this bill. What is it? Trade bait, we tend to call it. The Senate's going to take these 4 letters and say, whatever. So, members, I'm going to advise my members to vote against this particular bill, even though you did put $8 million in for broadband, which is almost an insult, but apparently not. Well, Mr. Chair, Representative Garofalo, it was fun to serve on the committee. Sorry, I can't vote for your bill here, or unless there's significant major changes to it. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Chair Garofalo.
Chair Garofalo, any closing comments?
Just Representative Mahoney, line 463 of the spreadsheet, you'll see the money for the unclaimed property. That's in there, so I didn't take that out. Mr. Chairman and members, this bill provides significant tax relief, makes unprecedented investments in workforce housing, and most importantly, for the future of our state, it makes our energy system cleaner and cheaper. I'd ask for your support of this bill.
Members, see no further discussion. Chair Garofalo renews his motion that House File 843, as amended, be referred to the General Register, and the clerk will take the roll.
Knobloch.
Aye.
Albright.
Aye.
Anderson. Carlson.
No.
Cornish.
Aye.
Davids.
Yes.
Dean. Detmer.
Aye.
Drazkowski.
Aye.
Garofalo.
Yes.
Gunther.
Yes.
Hackbarth. Hamilton.
Yes.
Hillstrom.
No.
Hornstein.
No.
Khan.
No.
Lincheski. Liebling. Loon. Mahoney.
No.
McNamara.
Aye.
Murphy.
Present.
Yes or no? Oh, okay. Nornis.
Aye.
Pulowski. Hoppy. Torkelson.
Aye.
Erdahl.
Aye.
Wigenius.
No.
Members, there being 15 ayes, 6 nays, 1 abstention, the motion prevails. House File 843 as amended is referred to the General Register. Representative Carlson.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, just a suggestion that I wanted to make. We had a pretty good discussion about what the expectations might be for the presentation of a bill. And maybe you and I can have some discussion about that. But the one thing that, and one of the reasons I raised the question I did, and we've got several major bills coming through, we all know that we pick up the newspaper sometime and one of the members of the House or the Senate here or in D.C. is quoted as saying, well, I didn't know that was in the bill. And that's why I think it's important that at least we touch on the highlights where there's major changes or initiatives when a bill is presented. But I'd be very willing to sit down and talk to you so that we have some understanding on both sides of the aisle what the expectations should be for the presentation of a bill, at least with the dealing of not only the numbers, which we did do very clearly here, but when there are initiatives that members should know about that are in a bill that should be presented in some way. And we do, both caucuses have our research briefs. We had ours here today, and I assume your folks had theirs, which are very helpful, you know, when you're going through a bill. But it is important to also make some of those points as a part of the record. And that's all I want to say on that at this point. I was not being critical of Garofalo. I think he thought maybe we were, but that was not my intent. My intent was to try to solicit more information. But thank you.
Chair Carlson, I'd be happy to talk to you about that afterwards. Members, we have the committee next meeting at 1 o'clock on Monday, where we'll take up the higher education bill, public safety bill. If you've got amendments for those that you want to offer, please get them to us sometime in the next hour or so here. And with that, members, the meeting is adjourned. Have a good weekend.